Some people's worst nightmares creep in quietly. Mine came roaring down a quiet street in the form of two men in black polo shirts breaking my grandpa's arm on his own front lawn, under orders from the HOA president herself. Their excuse? Routine compliance check. Routine. Yeah, right. The only thing they were checking that day was how far they could go before I came for them. Spoiler, not very far. But to understand how I got there, to the moment I decided enough was enough, you need to know where it began. The phone rang just after sunrise, cutting through the growl of my Harley. The desert stretched wide and empty around me, the sky still blushing orange. I was 100 miles from home, the engine beneath me steady as a heartbeat. I almost didn't answer, but then I saw the caller ID, hospital, and I knew deep down that whatever waited on the other end wasn't good. I thumbed the receiver open, wind trying to rip the words from my mouth. That's never good news, I muttered. The nurse's voice was crisp, too clean, the kind of voice trained to sound calm while holding back chaos. She told me my grandpa was in the ER. An accident, she said, and that he was stable. I didn't buy it. Stability is just a pause between one disaster and the next. What kind of accident? I asked. He had a fall, she said. I nearly laughed. My grandpa, Art Jackson, doesn't just fall. He's 84 years old and walks like a man who still remembers the rhythm of marching boots. Every step careful, steady, measured. The last time he hit the ground, it was 1968, jumping out of a Huey helicopter into the Myeong Delta, and he still landed upright. So no, I didn't believe that story for a second. I yanked the Harley into a U-turn without even slowing, tires screaming across the asphalt as horns blared behind me. Didn't matter. The road back to Fairlawn Ridge stretched out in front of me like a fuse waiting to burn down. 90 miles of anger, 90 miles of cold wind and hotter thoughts. By the time I rolled into the hospital lot, I was running on fumes and fury. Inside, the place smelled like bleach and hopelessness. My boots echoed on the tile as I followed the nurse's directions. Room 214. I pushed open the door, and there he was, my grandpa, smaller than I remembered, sitting up in bed like a weathered monument. His left arm was buried in a thick white cast strapped tight across his chest. His face was a mess of purple and yellow bruises, a neat stitch above one eyebrow. When he saw me, though, he grinned. That same sideways grin he used to wear when he beat me at cards. "Took you long enough," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. "Yeah," I said, pulling a chair closer. "Looks like you've been busy." The joke didn't land. I could see it right away. The swelling in his fingers, the shape of the break. That wasn't a fall. A fall doesn't leave fingerprints. This was done to him, not by him. "Tell me what really happened," I said. My voice dropped low, flat. The kind of voice I only use when I've run out of patience. He looked toward the window, sighing like it hurt to breathe. "It's that damn homeowners association," he said. "Just some trouble." He said it like he was talking about a leaky pipe. I waited. Silence works better than questions. Finally, he went on. "It's the new president, Karen Tom. She's been running everyone out, jacking up fees, fining folks for mailbox colors, yard lengths, you name it. But it's bigger than that. She wants to sell the whole neighborhood. Level it. Build some shiny business complex." He coughed, wincing. "A few of us told her no. We stopped paying her new special assessments. Yesterday, she sent her private security to my place. They said they were just there to deliver a warning. I told them exactly where they could shove it." I looked at the cast, then his bruised face. "And they didn't like that answer," I said quietly. "Not one bit." His eyes flickered with something old and fierce. "One held me. The other one? He did this." He nodded toward the cast. "Said it was a message from Ms. Tom. Told me I had 72 hours to sign her papers or she'd start evictions. Forceful ones." The air felt heavier after that, a silence so thick it buzzed. I knew the feeling well, the one that sits just before the chaos starts. The quiet heartbeat before an explosion. I'd spent half my life living in that space, first in uniform, then in the gray work that came after. I came to Fairlawn Ridge for peace. Thought I'd left the noise behind, but the noise found me again. And this time, it broke my family's bones. That was its first mistake. I stood, the chair legs scraping against the floor. 72 hours, I said. Not a question. A statement. The countdown had started. "Cal, don't," Grandpa said, his voice shaking. "They're not your problem. Let the police handle it." I almost laughed again. "I called them," I said. "You know what they told me? Civil matter. HOA dispute. Unless I've got video or a confession, it's my word against theirs. They took a statement and promised to look into it. They're not coming, Art. Nobody is." I leaned closer, my hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You know me, Grandpa. I don't start fights, but when someone brings one to my door, to my family's door, I finish it. I turned toward the door. Get some rest, I said. What are you going to do? He called after me. I stopped in the doorway, hand on the frame, but didn't turn around. I'm going to introduce Ms. Karen Tom to a different kind of homeowners association. Out in the hallway, I pulled out my phone. 2 calls to make. The first, my cousin Razor, president of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club. He's family, though not the kind that wears matching sweaters at Christmas. His family wears leather and steel. I told him everything. His reply was short. Where and when? That was all I needed. The second number hadn't been dialed in years. A man I used to know. The kind who makes problems vanish before daylight. But that could wait. First, I needed to look Karen Tom in the eye. She gave us 72 hours. That was generous. I'd return the favor. 1 day to fix what she'd broken. Or to learn what happens when you break the wrong man's peace. The clock was ticking now, loud enough for her to hear it in her sleep. Fairlawn Ridge wasn't always like this. When Grandpa bought his house 40 years ago, it was the picture of calm. Neat rows of homes named after trees, where kids rode bikes and parents traded sugar across fences. The mailboxes were painted every color of the rainbow. No rules, no fines, just people helping people. It was a slice of America that most forgot existed. Simple, honest, and alive. I remember summers here as a kid, chasing fireflies, the smell of barbecue in the air, the hum of crickets under the porch light. Back then, peace wasn't something you fought for. It was just there. But peace never lasts forever. It wears away slowly, like sand under the tide, until one day, you realize it's gone. The shift began 5 years ago, when Karen Tom moved in. Bought the biggest house on Maple and Elm, the one with the iron gate and the perfect lawn. She was new money, polished and loud, always talking about community standards and property values. It sounded good at first. It always does, but those are the kind of words that hide poison underneath. She dug up the old homeowners association, something that had been dead paperwork for decades, and brought it back to life under her name. Got herself elected president because nobody else wanted the headache. That's how tyrants are born, while good people are too busy living their lives to fight small battles. The first year, it was just trash cans and $20 fines for grass an inch too long. People grumbled, paid, and moved on. But Karen was testing boundaries. Year 2, she started tightening her grip. New paint codes, banning basketball hoops in front yard gardens, stripping the neighborhood of color, of character. Those who resisted got letters from lawyers. People like Grandpa, living off pensions, couldn't afford to fight. So they folded one by one. By year 4, she owned the board. Surrounded herself with loyal lapdogs, people who feared her or owed her. That's how Fairlawn Ridge, my grandpa's home, my childhood refuge, became a war zone dressed in suburbia. The HOA meetings became a farce. She would sit at a folding table in the community clubhouse, flanked by 2 stone-faced men who looked more like prison guards than neighbors. She would read out new rules, dismiss any objections with a smug wave of her hand, and gavel the meeting to a close. She had turned a community into her own private kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a cashmere glove. The fees skyrocketed. She called them special assessments for community improvements. But the only thing that improved was the car she drove and the diamonds on her fingers. The old sense of neighborly trust was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. People stopped talking to each other, afraid that a casual complaint might get back to Karen and result in another fine. I saw it happening on my visits to Grandpa. I saw the life draining out of the place. I told him he should move. I could set him up somewhere else, somewhere quiet. He refused. I'm not letting some power-hungry shrew push me out of my own home, he'd said. This is my piece of the world, Cal. I'm not giving it up. I respected his stubbornness. It was the same stubbornness that ran in my own veins. But I also knew he was an old soldier fighting a new kind of war, one waged with paperwork and intimidation, not bullets and courage. He was outmatched. Then came the final move. About 6 months ago, the rumors started. A big tech company wanted to build a new campus. Fairlawn Ridge, with its proximity to the freeway and its large, contiguous block of land, was the perfect spot. The developer needed to acquire all the properties quietly. No messy public eminent domain battles. Karen Tom, it turned out, wasn't just on a power trip. She was the tip of the spear, the developer's inside woman. Her job was to make life so miserable, so expensive for the residents, that they would be desperate to sell and sell cheap. She was the one creating the problem, so she could sell the solution. The plan was brilliant in its cruelty. Harass the homeowners into poverty, then swoop in and buy their properties for pennies on the dollar. She and the developer would make a fortune and an entire community would be wiped off the map. My grandpa and a few other old-timers, the last remnants of the original neighborhood, were the final holdouts. They refused to sign the buyout offers. They went to the press, but it was a small local story that got no traction. They tried to hire a lawyer, but Karen's legal team buried them in motions and delays. They were alone, and now that desperation had turned to violence. Breaking my grandpa's arm wasn't just an assault. It was a strategic move. It was meant to break his spirit, to show the other holdouts what would happen if they didn't fall in line. It was meant to signal that the rules were gone. Karen Tom had escalated. She had moved from legal intimidation to physical force, and in doing so, she had crossed the line. She had brought the war to my front door. She thought she was fighting a handful of senior citizens. She had no idea she had just declared war on me, and I was bringing an army. The 72-hour clock was a ticking bomb, and I intended to defuse it by blowing it up in their faces first. I left the hospital and went straight to my grandpa's house. The place smelled of old books and his pipe tobacco. But there was a new smell underneath it all. The metallic coppery scent of fear. The front door was splintered near the lock where they had forced it open. Inside, a floor lamp was overturned, its shade crushed, a clear sign of a struggle. I walked through the small house, every nerve ending tingling. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a crime scene, a declaration of war. My war. By mid-afternoon, the cavalry arrived. Not on horses, but on Harleys. The low, guttural rumble of a dozen big V-twin engines shook the windows of Fairlawn Ridge. My cousins. Razor, the president of the Iron Sentinels, led the pack. He's a mountain of a man with a beard that looks like it could nest a family of birds and hands that could crush coconuts. Behind him were Bear, a quiet giant who communicated mostly in grunts. Twitch, a wiry little guy whose eyes never stopped moving and whose fingers were always fiddling with a piece of wire or a lockpick. And 10 other guys who looked like they gargled with gravel and ate nails for breakfast. They parked their bikes in a neat, intimidating line in front of Grandpa's house. The neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of terror and hope. Razor swung a leg off his bike and pulled me into a hug that could have cracked a rib. "Heard you had some trouble with the neighborhood watch," he said, his voice a deep baritone rumble. "Something like that," I said. "They broke Art's arm." The humor vanished from Razor's face. His eyes went hard. "Who?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. HOA president, a woman named Karen Tom. She has hired help. Professionals. Not professional enough? Bear grunted from behind him, cracking his knuckles. The sound was like small branches snapping. While my cousins started to make their presence known just by existing on the street, I got an unexpected visitor, neighbor Fred. Fred lives 2 doors down. He's the kind of guy who gets nervous if his mail is delivered 5 minutes late. He's perpetually clad in khaki shorts and a polo shirt, and he always looks like he's just seen a ghost. He skirted across his lawn, his head on a swivel, and stopped about 10 FT from me. "Cal! Oh my goodness, Cal!" "Is it true what they said about your grandpa?" he whispered, shouted, wringing his hands. "It's true, Fred," I said. And are these men with you?" He gestured nervously at the wall of leather and denim that was the Iron Sentinels. Twitch was cleaning his teeth with a switchblade and winked at him. Fred looked like he was about to faint. "They're family, Fred. They're here to help." "Help? Oh dear. Cal, this Karen Tom is not someone to be trifled with. She has security everywhere. Drones, Cal, they fly over at night. Little buzzing things with cameras. I saw one hovering outside my bathroom window last week. It's terrifying." He was sweating, his face pale. Fred was a fountain of panicked, useful information. "Drones, you say?" I looked at Razor. He raised an eyebrow. This changed the tactical landscape. We weren't just dealing with thugs in a car. This was a coordinated surveillance operation. Karen Tom wasn't an amateur. She was playing for keeps. Yes. And cars. They patrol the streets all night. Black SUVs with tinted windows. They follow people. "My wife says they followed her back from the grocery store," Fred said, his voice cracking. "We have to do something. But what can we do? She'll evict us all." "Calm down, Fred," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. He flinched. "We're going to handle it." I turned to my crew. "All right, new plan. This is bigger than wet hot. Twitch, I want you to find those drones. I want to see what they see. Bear, you and a couple of the boys do a slow roll through the neighborhood. Look for those black SUVs. Get plate numbers, faces. Don't engage. Just be seen. Let them know there's a new dog in the yard. Razor, you're with me. We need to do some close target recon. We need to know her routine, her security layout, everything." Fred looked on, his eyes wide. "What are you going to do?" "We're going to take back your neighborhood, Fred." I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. "But first, we're going to cut the head off the snake." The plan was forming in my mind, a cold, hard piece of geometry. Karen Tom had built a fortress of fear and technology around her. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her drones and her hired muscle made her safe. But every fortress has a weak spot. Every system can be broken. She had eyes in the sky, but she had no idea what was coming for her on the ground. She was watching the sheep, unaware that the wolves had already slipped inside the fence. The first 60 hours would be for gathering intelligence. The last 12 would be for action. The clock was ticking and we were about to start our own countdown. Night fell on Fairlawn Ridge, but it didn't bring peace. It brought a different kind of darkness, the kind that buzzes. Fred wasn't exaggerating. As dusk settled, we spotted them. Small black quadcopter drones rising silently from the backyards of houses loyal to Karen. They were like mechanical gargoyles perching on rooftops and hovering at street corners, their little red lights blinking like malevolent eyes. They were her spies, her way of ensuring complete control. An army of silent, unblinking snitches. This was the first piece of her machine we had to break. Twitch, my cousin with the magic fingers, grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. Consumer-grade DJI Phantoms, he whispered, peering through a pair of high-powered binoculars from Grandpa's attic window. Good cameras, but their command frequency is as secure as a screen door on a submarine. Give me an hour. He set up his laptop, a mess of wires and antennas sprouting from it like some kind of techno-organism. He started typing, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. While Twitch worked on hacking the sky, the rest of us prepared for the ground game. Bear's reconnaissance ride had paid off. They had identified 2 black SUVs making slow, methodical patrols. 4 men in each vehicle, hard-faced guys with earpieces, trying to look casual, but failing miserably. They were ex-military or ex-cops. I could tell by their posture, mercs. Karen wasn't just hiring local toughs. She was paying for professional-grade intimidation. They had a route, a predictable pattern. That was their mistake. Predictability is a weakness you can exploit. We picked our spot, a narrow alley that ran behind a row of houses connecting Elm and Oak Street. It was poorly lit with overgrown bushes on one side and a tall wooden fence on the other. A perfect choke point. It was part of their patrol route. They'd drive through it once an hour to make sure no one was sneaking around in the backyards. We didn't plan on a firefight. That was too loud, too messy. This was about sending a message. A quiet one. We set the trap. We rolled a dumpster partway into the alley, enough to force the SUV to slow to a crawl to get past it. Razor, Bear, and 2 others took up positions behind the fence. I took the opposite side, hidden in the dense foliage of an ancient lilac bush. We were armed with heavy flashlights and short, weighted lengths of iron pipe, not guns. We weren't trying to kill them. We were trying to educate them. An hour later, we heard the low rumble of the SUV turning into the alley. Its headlights cut a swath through the darkness, illuminating the dumpster. As we predicted, the driver slowed down, inching the vehicle forward. The moment the front bumper was even with my position, I gave the signal. A low whistle like a night bird. Then all hell broke loose. We moved as one. I burst from the bushes and smashed the driver's side window with my pipe. The glass imploded and I shoved the high-lumen flashlight directly into the driver's face. He screamed, blinded by the sudden disorienting blast of light. At the same instant, Razor and his team vaulted the fence. Bear wrenched the rear passenger door open and hauled a guy out like he was a sack of potatoes. The other 2 MKs were a fraction of a second too slow. By the time they reached for the pistols on their hips, they were blinded, disoriented, and being dragged out of the vehicle into the darkness. The whole thing took less than 10 seconds. It was a whirlwind of controlled, efficient violence. We disarmed them, zip-tied their hands behind their backs, and put black hoods over their heads. They were professionals, but they were complacent. They were expecting to intimidate old people and scared families, not run into a team of guys who had been doing this kind of work in far more dangerous places for years. We left 3 of them tied and hooded, sitting in a neat row against the fence. Minutes later, county deputies, redirected by Fred's 911 call, found and hauled off the 3 bound goons, clearing the alley before they could warn the boss. We kept the 4th one, the one who looked like he was in charge. We took him back to Grandpa's garage. Razor sat him down on a wooden chair in the middle of the concrete floor. I pulled the hood off his head. He was in his late 30s with a military-style haircut and a tattoo of ass snake eating its own tail on his neck. He blinked in the dim light of the single bear bulb hanging from the ceiling, his eyes full of hate and fear. He tried to project toughness, but his jaw was clenched too tight. "Who are you?" he spat. "I'm the guy whose grandpa you put in the hospital," I said, my voice calm. I circled him slowly. "So, here's what's gonna happen. You're going to tell me everything. You're going to tell me about Karen Tom. You're going to tell me how many of you there are, what your orders are, and what your next move is. And you're going to do it now." He sneered. "Go to hell." "Wrong answer," I said. Just then, Twitch walked into the garage holding his laptop. He had a wide, triumphant grin on his face. "Boss," he said, turning the laptop toward me, "we're in. I have control of the entire drone network, and you're not going to believe what I just saw." I tapped a key, and a video started to play. It was a live feed shot from high above, looking down on a secluded corner of a nearby park. There, under the pale glow of a street lamp, stood Karen Tom, and she wasn't alone. She was talking to a man in an expensive suit, his face clearly visible in the drone's high-definition camera. My blood ran cold. I knew that face. I hadn't seen it in 10 years, not since a disastrous operation in Kandahar. It was Marcus Thorne, a disgraced former CIA contractor who sold out his own team for a payday. A man I thought was either dead or in a foreign prison, and he washer in Fairlawn Ridge. The game had just changed dramatically. Seeing Marcus Thorne's face on that screen was like a ghost kicking down my door. 10 years ago, he was a name in a file, a private contractor attached to my unit in Afghanistan. His job was logistics. Our job was kicking indoors. He was supposed to supply intel, support, a friendly eye in the sky. Instead, he supplied our position to the highest bidder. We walked into a trap that cost me 2 good men. Thorne vanished, presumed to have been caught in the same firefight he orchestrated. The official report said he was killed in action. A convenient lie. The truth was, he'd cashed in and disappeared. And now he had reappeared in my grandpa's neighborhood, standing next to a corrupt HOA president. This wasn't just about a real estate deal anymore. This was personal. "Play it back," I said to Twitch, my voice tight. "With audio." Twitch fiddled with his keyboard and their voices, tiny and distant, came through the laptop speakers. Karen Tom was whining. "Getting out of control, Marcus. These old fools are still holding out. And now some biker gang has shown up. They ambushed one of my patrols tonight." Thorne's voice was exactly as I remembered it. Smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. "Relax, Karen. They're amateurs. A minor setback. Your job is to keep the pressure on. My job is to handle the rough stuff. The deadline stands, 72 hours. We need those last few signatures or the whole deal with Omnicorp falls through." Omniorp, a massive faceless tech conglomerate. So that was the endgame. Bulldoze this community of memories and families to build a glass and steel temple to corporate greed. And Thorne was the architect of its destruction. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. This was his signature move. Find a weak point. Apperson like Karen Tom, corruptible and greedy. Use her as a tool to create chaos and division from the inside. Then, when things got messy, bring in his own private army to restore order while he walks away with the prize. He'd done the exact same thing to my unit a decade ago. Our captive in the chair, the merc with the snake tattoo, had been listening. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes when he heard Thorne's name. I crouched down in front of him. "Marcus Thorne," I said quietly. "Is that who you work for? A traitor who sells out his own men?" The merc's tough guy facade finally cracked. He worked for a security company, probably one Thorne owned under a shell corporation. He thought he was a professional soldier, finding out he was just a pawn for a man like Thorne. A man universally despised in the special operations community was like a splash of acid on his pride. "Thorne's a ghost," he mumbled. "Not anymore, he isn't," I said, tapping the laptop screen. "He's right here, and you're working for him, helping him terrorize elderly citizens." "How does that feel?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. His silence was my answer. I had him. "What's Omnicorp's deadline?" I pressed. "Tomorrow night," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "The board meets to finalize the land acquisition. If Thorne doesn't have signed agreements from 100% of the properties by then, the deal is off. They'll move on to their second-choice location in Arizona." Karen's public 72-hour ultimatum was a smokescreen. Thorne's real clock was already down to 36 hours, not Karen's 72 hours. It was less than 36. Thorne was getting desperate. That made him dangerous. He wouldn't risk losing a multi-million-dollar deal because of a few stubborn old folks. He would escalate. And then came the twist that turned my stomach. As we watched the drone feed, Thorne handed Karen a small unmarked duffel bag. "This should handle the final holdouts," he said. "It's all set. My team will take care of the placement tonight. By morning, the fire department will be declaring half the block unsafe for habitation. A tragic gas leak, an old pipe. Such a shame. The evacuation order will be mandatory. And you, my dear, will be there with your clipboard and your pen, ready to help these poor, displaced souls sign their lives away for a fraction of their value." My heart stopped. A gas leak. He was going to rig a gas line to explode. He wasn't just going to intimidate them. He was going to blow them out of their homes. He was willing to risk killing dozens of people, my grandpa included, to close a business deal. This had gone far beyond a simple fight for property. This was now about preventing a mass casualty event. The line between revenge and justice, the one I had been walking so carefully, just got erased. There was no room for moral ambiguity anymore. Thorne had made it simple. It was us or them. I looked at Razor, then at Bear. Their faces were grim. They understood. We were no longer just a bunch of bikers helping out my grandpa. We were the only thing standing between Marcus Thorne and a catastrophe. We had the intelligence. We had his face, his voice, his entire plan recorded on a hard drive. We had a hostage who could testify against him. We could go to the police now. But would they act in time? Would they believe a story from a bunch of outlaw bikers based on a hacked drone feed? Or would they get bogged down in warrants and bureaucracy while Thor's team was lighting a fuse under my grandpa's street? It was a risk I couldn't take. We had to handle this ourselves. The question was how. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Thorne was planning a fire, but he had no idea he was the one about to get burned. The revelation of Thorne's planto caused a gas explosion sucked all the air out of the garage. It was no longer about pushing back against a bully. We were now in the business of preventing a terrorist act on American soil. Revenge for my grandpa's arm felt like a petty luxury I could no longer afford. This was about saving lives. The moral calculus shifted from a gray area to stark black and white. Marcus Thorne was a cancer that had to be cut out immediately. The line I was worried about crossing, the one between justice and pure vengeance, was now 1,000 miles behind me. When your enemy plans to burn down a neighborhood full of sleeping families, you don't worry about fighting fair. You worry about stopping him by any means necessary. I looked at the merc tied to the chair. His name was Miller. He was scared, but he was also a professional who realized he'd been played for a fool by a man with no honor. Where, I asked him. Where are they rigging the gas line? He hesitated for a second, then the dam of his loyalty broke. There is a main distribution valve at the end of the cul-de-sac on Chestnut Street, he said, the words spilling out in a rush. It's an older neighborhood. The infrastructure is weak. Thorne's demo guy said it would be easy. A small shaped charge on the primary joint. It won't be a huge fireball. Nothing that spectacular. The C4 only ruptured the line. It's the heavier-than-air gas air mix that would have crept into cellars and ignited into a firestorm. Just a rupture. The gas is heavier than air. It'll sink, fill the cellars, and crawl spaces of the houses at the end of the street. Then an anonymous call to the fire department about a gas smell. They show up, their truck's engine backfires, a stray spark, and the whole block goes up. It'll look like a tragic accident. My grandpa's house was 2 doors down from the end of that cul-de-sac. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles ached. This was Thorne's Mow all over again. Plausible deniability, an accident that solves all his problems. Neighbor Fred, who had been hovering nervously in the doorway of the garage this whole time, let out a small squeak. Chestnut Street? That's where the Hendersons live. They have a new baby. His face was ashen. The abstract threat had just become horribly real for him. It had names and faces. A baby, that was it. The last straw. I looked at Razor. He just nodded. He didn't need a speech. He knew. We all knew what had to be done. I turned back to Miller. How many men? 2, he said. A demo expert and 1 guard. They're supposed to move in at 2 in the morning. Low visibility, minimal traffic. I looked at my watch. It was just after midnight. We had less than 2 hours. Okay, I said, my voice cold and hard. Here's the plan, Twitch. You are our eye in the sky. I want you glued to that drone feed. You are the Overwatch. You want to know if a cat sneezes within a 5B block radius. Understood. Twitch gave me a sharp nod, his eyes intense. Got it, boss. Razor Bear, you're with me. We're going to greet the welcoming committee. The rest of you, I said to the other sentinels, you are the containment team. You will form a silent perimeter around the entire cul-de-sac. Nobody gets in and nobody gets out except for us. No phones, no radios, complete silence. We do this clean. Fred wrung his hands, his knuckles white. But what if something goes wrong? Shouldn't we call the police, the fire department? I put a hand on his shoulder, my grip firm, but I hoped reassuring. Fred, by the time the police get a warrant and the fire department gets here, it'll be too late. We are the only people who can stop this right now. Do you understand? He looked from me to Razor, to the cold determination on all our faces. He swallowed hard and gave a jerky nod. Okay, I continued. I need one more thing from you, Fred. I need a distraction. A legitimate one. Fred looked terrified. A distraction. Me, Cal, I'm not, I can't. Yes, you can. I said, looking him straight in the eye. At exactly 1:55 a.m., I need you to call 911. I need you to report a prowler in your backyard. I need you to sound exactly as panicked as you are right now. Tell them you think he's trying to break in. That will draw the local police patrol to your street on the other side of the neighborhood. At the exact moment, Thorne's team is expecting 0 police presence. It will keep them occupied for at least 10 minutes. Can you do that for your neighbors, Fred? Can you do that for the Hendersons, baby? The color drained from his face. then slowly returned, replaced by a flicker of resolve. He took a deep breath. "A prowler," he repeated, his voice shaking but firm. "My backyard 155. I can do that." In that moment, the nervous neighbor disappeared, and a man protecting his home stood in his place. We left Miller tied up in the garage, guarded by one of the sentinels. We were about to walk into a situation where the stakes were absolute. Failure wasn't an option. We were operating outside the law, but we were fighting for a cause that was undeniably just. It was a choice I made without hesitation. Thorne had left us no other path. He wanted to turn Chestnut Street into a crater. We were about to turn it into a trap. His own cruel plan was about to become the instrument of his downfall. The cul-de-sac was about to become a kill box, and his men were walking right into it. The cul-de-sac on Chestnut Street was a perfect trap, a dead-end bowl, one way in, one way out. The houses were dark, the residents asleep, completely unaware of the fuse that was about to be lit under their beds. We moved like shadows, melting into the manicured lawns and hiding behind perfectly trimmed hedges. The iron sentinels had formed a silent, invisible ring of steel 2 blocks out. Nothing with a motor or a mouth was getting near this place. Twitch was feeding us constant updates through a single nearly invisible earpiece I wore. Eyes on the target vehicle. His voice buzzed. Unmarked panel van. 2 bogies inside. Turning onto Chestnut, now 500 weed out. Razor Bear and I were positioned behind a large oak tree directly across the street from the gas main access point. It was a small green metal plate set into the grass of the cul-de-sac central island. The van rolled to a stop without its headlights, its engine cutting off with a soft click. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with anticipation. 2 men got out. One was a big guy, the muscle, carrying a short-barreled shotgun. The other was smaller, carrying a heavier-looking tool bag, the demo man. They moved with professional confidence, scanning the dark houses, believing they were alone. "There at the plate," Twitch whispered in my ear. "Demo is opening his bag." I watched as the smaller man knelt and pried up the metal plate. He pulled out a flashlight and a block of what looked like C4 plastic explosive trailing wires. This was it. I gave a soft click with my tongue, the signal to move. We didn't rush them. We flowed out of the darkness from 3 different directions, closing the distance silently on the balls of our feet. They were focused on their task, their senses pointed down at the hole in the ground. A classic case of tunnel vision. They never knew we were there until Bear's huge hand clamped down on the guard's shoulder from behind. The guard grunted in surprise and tried to bring the shotgun around. It was a fatal mistake. Razor was already on him, a blur of motion. He didn't use a weapon. He used his hands. A sharp, precise strike to the man's elbow shattered the joint, and the shotgun clattered to the grass. A second strike to the side of the neck, and the guard crumpled into an unconscious heap. It was brutal, efficient, and over in less than 2 seconds. The demo man looked up, his eyes wide with terror, the block of C4 still in his hand. I was standing right in front of him. He opened his mouth to shout, but I was faster. I drove the heel of my boot into his chest, knocking the wind out of him and sending him sprawling backward. The explosive block flew from his grasp and landed softly on the grass a few feet away. I put my foot in his throat, not hard enough to crush it, but hard enough for him to understand that his night was over. "Don't move," I said, my voice a low growl. He stared up at me, his face a mask of pure fear. We zip-tied them both quickly and professionally, and dragged them into the shadows just as Twitch's voice came through my earpiece. Police patrol car just pulled up at Fred's house. The distraction worked. "You're clear." Fred had come through. The brave, terrified man had done his part. Now it was time for ours. I picked up the block of C4. It was real. Enough to rupture the main and flood the entire street with explosive gas. In the demo man's bag, we found his phone. It was a burner, but it had one number on speed deal labeled Boss. Marcus Thorne. A new plan began to form in my mind. A dangerous, audacious plan. We had stopped the attack. Now it was time to turn their own weapon against them. I looked at Razor. "We need to set the stage for the grand finale." He grinned, understanding immediately. We didn't just want to stop Thorne. We wanted to destroy him publicly. We went back to the van. Inside, we found what we were looking for. More demolition equipment, blueprints of the neighborhood's utility lines, and a laptop. Twitch was going to have a field day with that, but I found something else tucked under the driver's seat. A manila envelope. Inside were copies of the fraudulent property agreements Karen Tom was forcing on the residents, and stapled to them was a detailed payment ledger. It showed a series of wire transfers from a shell corporation directly to a private account, an account belonging to Karen Tom. It was the smoking gun, hard proof of her conspiracy with Thorne. But then, as I flipped through the pages, I saw something that made my blood run cold for the second time that night. It was Annam on one of the wire transfers, an authorization signature at the bottom of a payment instruction. It wasn't Thorne's name. It wasn't Karen's. It was a name I knew better than my own. A name that made no sense in this context. It was Arthur Jensen, my grandpa. There in black and white was my grandpa's signature authorizing a $50,000 payment from the developer shell company to Karen Tom. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It had to be a forgery. It had to be a trick. But the signature was perfect. I'd seen it on 1,000 birthday cards and permission slips. It was his. My grandpa, the victim, the moral center of this whole fight, was on their payroll. The world tilted on its axis. My grandpa's signature on that payment ledger was a bomb that went off in the dead quiet of my mind. Every certainty I had, every piece of the puzzle I thought I had solved, shattered into a million pieces. Arthur Jensen, my grandpa, the righteous old soldier. The victim whose broken arm had been my call to arms. A paid collaborator. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, there it was. His familiar, steady signature on a document that tied him directly to the conspiracy to destroy his own neighborhood. I felt a wave of nausea. Was this whole thing a lie? Was his broken arm just part of the show? A piece of theater designed to manipulate me? I stood there in the dark, the papers trembling in my hand, my mind racing through a maze of betrayal and confusion. Razor saw the look on my face. "Cal, what is it?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I mumbled, handing him the ledger. He looked at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He didn't know the name. "Arthur Jensen," I said, my voice. "It's my grandpa." Bear looked over his shoulder, grunted, and shook his head. "Doesn't make sense." He was right. It made no sense at all. My grandpa loved this neighborhood. He would rather die than see it bulldozed. He was the one who refused to sell. Theone who rallied the last resistance. Why would he be taking money from the very people trying to force him out? Was he a traitor? Or was this some kind of deeper game I couldn't see? My trust, a solid granite foundation just moments before, had turned to quicksand. My first instinct was to confront him, to drive back to the hospital, storm into his room, and demand an explanation, but I couldn't. Not yet. We were in the middle of an operation. Thorne and Karen were still out there. The HOA meeting, the final showdown, was scheduled for the next evening. That was the real deadline. That was when Karen planned to have the last of the signed, fraudulent documents collected from the displaced residents after the accidental explosion. We had stopped the explosion, but her plan was still in motion. I had to see this through. I had to put my personal shock and betrayal on ice and focus on the mission. We took the captured mercs, the van, the explosives, and all the evidence back to our new ad hoc command center. The garage of an empty house down the street that one of the sentinels had quietly opened for us. Twitch was already there, his fingers flying across the captured laptop. It took me 90 minutes of brute force with rainbow tables and a borrowed GPU cluster, but I finally cracked their vault. "This is gold, pure gold," he said, not even looking up. "Thorne's entire operation is on here, encrypted, but give me a couple of hours. I've got his financials, his contacts, his contracts with Omnicorp. I even have a draft of the press release he prepared about the tragic gas line accident." While Twitch worked his magic, I tried to work my way through the maze in my head. I had a choice to make. I could expose my grandpa along with Karen and Thorne, or I could bury this one piece of evidence. Protecting him felt like a betrayal of the truth, a betrayal of all the other neighbors he had seemingly sold out. But exposing him felt like a betrayal of my own blood, of the man who raised me. The core question I'd been wrestling with, the line between law and revenge, suddenly had a new agonizing dimension. What is the line between justice and family? Then another thought crept in, cold and sharp. What if the broken arm was real? What if my grandpa took their money, thinking he could play them, and then tried to back out when he realized how far they would go? Maybe they broke his arm, not because he was a holdout, but because he was a collaborator who got cold feet. Maybe it was a punishment, a warning to stay in line. This theory felt slightly better, but it still painted him as a man who had compromised his principles for money. It still made him a player in their dirty game. I pushed the thoughts away. I couldn't afford the distraction. We had less than 24 hours until the HOA meeting. We had a mountain of evidence. We had 2 of Thorne's men in custody. We had Thorne's entire playbook on a hard drive, and we had the C4. The plan began to crystallize. We weren't just going to show up at that meeting. We were going to turn it into a live stream tribunal. We were going to use their own technology, their own tactics against them. We would use Twitch's hacking skills to take over the local cable access channel and every social media feed in town. We would show the world the drone footage of Thorne and Karen. We would show the payment ledgers. We would show a video confession from Miller, the captured Merce. We would show them everything. We would make Karen Tom and Marcus Thorne famous in the worst possible way. As for my grandpa, I made a decision. I would confront him after the battle was won. I would get the truth. But first, I had to burn down the kingdom that Karen and Thorne had built. The final showdown was set. The HOA meeting was no longer about property values and beige doors. It was going to be a trial, and I was going to be the prosecutor, judge, and jury. I just prayed that when all the evidence was presented, my own family name wouldn't be among the guilty. The community clubhouse was a sterile beige box that smelled faintly of cheap coffee and desperation. This was Karen Tom's throne room. Tonight, it was going to be her scaffold. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. By 6:30, the room was packed. Scared residents drawn by the mandatory summons filled the cheap plastic chairs. They looked defeated, huddled together like sheep waiting for the slaughter. In the front row sat my grandpa, his arm in its sling, his face a stony, unreadable mask. Against his doctor's advice, he'd signed himself out early and ridden back in an EMT buddy's SUV, determined to be here tonight. I hadn't spoken to him. I couldn't. Not until this was over. At precisely 7 p.m, Karen Tom made her entrance. She strode to the front of the room, flanked by 2 new bodyguards, massive men in tight black suits who looked even meaner than the last crew. Thorne had air freighted in a secondary detail from Miami that afternoon. Soft-spoken special ops veterans in black suits primed for intimidation. Marcus Thorne was with her, smiling, his smug reptilian smile. He wasn't trying to hide in the shadows anymore. He was here to watch his victory lap. They took their seats, at the head table, looking out over the silent crowd with the supreme confidence of predators who knew the hunt was over. "Welcome," Karen began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is a difficult time for our community. In light of the recent safety concerns regarding our aging gas infrastructure, Mr. Thorne and his company, Omni Corp, have graciously expedited their offer to purchase our properties." She gestured to a stack of papers in front of her. "We have the agreements here for the final few households. Once you sign, you will be compensated fairly, and you can move on to safer homes." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was the arsonist pretending to be the firefighter. That was my cue. I was standing at the back of the room near the main entrance, dressed in my usual jeans and leather jacket. I gave a subtle nod to Twitch, who was parked a block away in the captured van, now a mobile command center. "Showtime," I murmured into the tiny microphone pinned inside my collar. Suddenly, the large television screen on the wall behind Karen, which was supposed to be showing a slideshow of architectural renderings for the new OmniCorp campus, flickered. It went black for a second, then snapped on with a new image. A high-define, top-down drone shot of Karen and Thorne meeting in the park. Twitch had patched us into the clubhouse's audio-visual system. And not just here, he was broadcasting this on a live stream, pushed to every phone in Fairlawn Ridge and simulcast over the local public access channel. The audio from the drone footage filled the room, Thorne's voice clear as a bell saying, "My team will take care of the placement tonight. By morning, the fire department will be declaring half the block unsafe for habitation. A tragic gas leak." The crowd gasped. People started murmuring, looking at each other, then at the head table. Karen's face went white. Thorne shot to his feet, his face a thundercloud of fury. "What is this? Shut it off!" he roared at his guards. But it was too late. Before the guards could even move, the doors to the clubhouse burst open. Razor, Bear, and a dozen other iron sentinels filed in, forming a silent, imposing wall that blocked all the exits. They weren't armed with guns. They didn't need to be. Their presence was enough to freeze the 2 bodyguards in place. "Please sit down, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily through the stunned silence. I walked slowly down the center aisle. The presentation is just getting started. The screen behind me switched again. Now it showed the payment ledger, my grandpa's name, conspicuously redacted by a black bar. The wire transfers to Karen's secret account were highlighted in red. "This," I announced, "is a record of the bribes Karen Tom accepted to sell you out." The crowd erupted. Cries of thief and traitor filled the air. Karen looked like she was about to collapse. "And just in case there's any confusion," I continued, Let's hear from one of Mr. Thorne's employees. The screen changed again, this time to a video of the captured Merc Miller sitting in Thegarudge. His face was bruised, but his voice was clear. He laid out the entire plan, from the initial intimidation tactics to the plot to blow the gas main, naming Thorne as the man who gave the orders. Thorne was cornered. A wild, desperate look came into his eyes. He pulled a small pistol from inside his jacket. "You're all dead," he screamed, leveling the gun at me. But as his finger tightened on the trigger, a new voice cut through the chaos. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marcus." It was my grandpa. He was standing up, his good hand holding a small, old-fashioned tape recorder. Because while Cal was gathering his evidence, I was gathering mine. He pressed a button. It was a recording of a phone call. He'd rigged a micrope recorder designed for his hearing aid because flipping through my phone app was impossible with one good arm. It was Thorne's voice again, but this time he was talking to my grandpa. "Just take the money, old man," Thorne was saying. "You helped get the ball rolling with Karen. Just sign the final papers and walk away. Nobody has to know you were my first point of contact." Then my grandpa's voice, strong and defiant. "The deal was to get rid of Karen Tom. You son of a, not to destroy the neighborhood. I'm out." Then the sound of a struggle, a crack, and my grandpa crying out in pain. The sound of his arm breaking. The whole room fell silent. I finally understood. My grandpa hadn't been a traitor. He had been playing a deeper game all along. He had made a deal with the devil to get rid of a smaller demon. But the devil had changed the terms. The broken arm wasn't a punishment for getting cold feet. It was what happened when he tried to stop the whole thing. The signature on the payment was real, but it was part of his gambit to get close to the real snake. Just as this final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, the main doors of the clubhouse slammed open again. This time it wasn't bikers. It was a half-dozen state troopers in full tactical gear, their weapons raised. "Nobody move!" one of them shouted. They had finally arrived, and it looked like we were all about to be arrested. The standoff lasted for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. State troopers flooding the room, guns up. Thorne with his pistol pointed at me, my cousins forming a human wall, and a room full of shell-shocked residents watching a real-life drama that was more intense than anything on television. The lead trooper, a sergeant with a face like carved granite and Sutton on his name tag, took in the scene with a quick professional eye. His gaze flickered from Thorne's gun to me, to the big screen, still playing the evidence, then to the iron sentinels. "Drop the weapon now," Sutton barked at Thorne. Thorne was sweating, his eyes darting around for an escape that didn't exist. For a second, I thought he was going to start shooting and take his chances. But then he saw the cold, hard certainty in the trooper's eyes. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He let the pistol clatter to the floor. Two troopers were on him instantly, slamming him face down on the table and cuffing his hands behind his back with brutal efficiency. Another pair did the same to a sputtering, weeping Karen Tom. It was over. Sergeant Sutton walked over to me. He looked at me, then at Razor and the other sentinels. I was expecting him to put me in cuffs next. "You must be Cal Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. "And you're late," I replied. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. "We got an anonymous tip, a very detailed one. Thanks to Grandpa's midnight tip to the state AG's unit, troopers had the warrant queued, and were en route by 7:15 just in time. Came with a hard drive full of evidence and instructions to be here at 7:30. Said you guys would have everything wrapped up by then." He glanced at my grandpa, who gave him a slight nod. Of course, Grandpa's plan had always included a fail-safe. He knew I would bring the thunder, but he made sure the law was there to clean up Themis. He had orchestrated the entire symphony. The troopers led Thorne and Karen away, along with their bewildered bodyguards. The residents started cheering, a wave of relief and joy washing through the room. They were hugging each other, crying, and patting my cousins on the back. Even neighbor Fred was there looking triumphant. He gave me a shaky thumbs up from across the room. I made my way through the crowd to my grandpa. He was leaning against the wall, looking tired but satisfied. I stood in front of him, not knowing what to say. The last 12 hours had been a hurricane of doubt about him. "You had me worried, old man," I finally said. He chuckled, a dry rattling sound. "Had to, Cal. I knew Karen was just a symptom. I needed to find the disease. That was Thor. It was a dummy payment slip." Grandpa signed under the guise of cooperation, then immediately forwarded copies to the State Fraud Task Force to draw their fire. I made contact with him months ago, pretending I was willing to play ball, to be his inside man to help oust Karen. It was the only way to get close enough to see the whole picture. He winced as he adjusted the sling on his arm. I knew he'd eventually show his true colors. I just underestimated how colorful he'd get. When he told me his plan for the gas line, I knew I couldn't stop him alone. and I knew there was only one person who could. You. He looked me straight in the eye. I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you, son. I had to let you believe I was just a victim. Your anger, your protective instinct, that's your superpower. I needed you to unleash it without holding back, without any confusion about my role. Sometimes, Toe, in a war, a general has to be willing to sacrifice a pawn, even if that pawn is himself. The weight of the last day lifted off my shoulders. He hadn't betrayed anyone. He'd played the most dangerous game of all, using himself as bait to save his home. He had walked the line between law and revenge, and found a way to serve them both. The next morning, the sun rose on a different Fairlawn ridge. The black SUVs and the drones were gone. The news was full of the story of the corrupt HOA president and the terrorist developer. Omnicorp immediately cut all ties with Thorne, their stock taking a nosedive. The remaining members of the HOA board resigned in disgrace. An emergency election was held, and neighbor Fred, to his own utter shock, was unanimously elected the new president. His first official act was to abolish 90% of Karen's stupid rules. My cousin stuck around for a celebratory barbecue in Grandpa's backyard. The whole neighborhood came. For the first time in years, the air was filled with laughter instead of fear. Razor and his boys, who had terrified these same people just days before, were now local heroes, awkwardly accepting plates of potato salad and thanks from grateful homeowners. As the sun set, I stood with Grandpa by his newly reinstalled American flagpole. He raised the flag with his one good arm. We watched it climb, the red, white, and blue catching the last light of the day. You know, he said quietly, there's a fine line between doing what's right and doing what's necessary. And where do you think we landed? I asked. He looked at the peaceful street, at the families talking and kids playing. He looked at the flag waving proudly against the darkening sky. Right where we needed to be, he said, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was finally home. The quiet I had been looking for wasn't about the absence of noise. It was about the presence of peace. And sometimes to get peace you have to go to